Dr. Helfand is the immediate past president of International Physicians for the Prevention of Nuclear War, which is awarded the Nobel Peace Prize. And he's also the co-founder of Physicians for Social Responsibility. In addition to all this, Ira is a Rotarian and is a member of Rotarians E-Club for World Peace, which is based in Hawaii. So without further ado, I'll hand it off to Ira. I'll move this out the way. Did you need anything else?
No, good, thanks. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for inviting me to be part of this summit, and thank you all for coming. This is not easy stuff that we're going to be talking about over the next couple of days, and I appreciate very much your willingness to engage in this conversation. My job, as I see it this morning, is to set the stage a bit, to sort of lay out where we are right now and what it is that we need to be working on over the coming couple of days. Oftentimes, when I'm speaking, it's to people who know very little about nuclear war. I know that this group is different, and some of the things that I'll have to say this morning, excuse me for a second, are things that you may already be familiar with. But I think it's worthwhile sort of going over the ground a little bit and establishing what it is that we need to be telling our broader communities, the people around us. And I think basically there are three messages that we need to bring to the rest of the world. One, we need to help people understand that nuclear war is not some, thank you. Nuclear war is not some vestige of the past. This is a real and present danger. Secondly, people need to understand how catastrophic a nuclear war would be. And third, people need to understand, and this is most important, that nuclear war does not need to happen, that this is in our control, and we need to do something about it. Let me start by describing the current state of the danger. You know, back when I first became involved in this issue in the 1970s and 1980s, a very long time ago, we all understood, everyone, that nuclear war was a real possibility. We were terrified that there would be a nuclear war in the near future. It was part of the popular culture. There were movies about nuclear war. There were songs about nuclear war. We had nightmares about nuclear war. And because of that knowledge, millions of people took action. And they brought about a profound change in the nuclear policies of the great powers, the United States and the Soviet Union, and brought about the end of the Cold War nuclear arms race. And it was an extraordinary accomplishment, which I'll come back to a little bit later. But when the Cold War ended in 1990, we all began the active process of forgetting about the nuclear danger. Those of us who were alive then breathed this huge sigh of relief. We dodged the bullet. There hadn't been a nuclear war, and we did not want to think about this ever again, and we didn't, by and large. People of my age actively put this information out of their minds. And as a result of that, people of your generation were never taught, for the most part, about this issue. But the danger didn't go away when the Cold War ended. There were still thousands of nuclear warheads in the world waiting for things to get tense in the international sphere again. And they have gotten tense. Over the last 10 years, the danger of nuclear war has escalated dramatically, to the point where in 2018, the former United States Secretary of Defense, William Perry, said that in his opinion, the danger of nuclear war then, 2018, was greater than it had ever been, worse than at the worst moment of the Cold War. And of course, things have gotten substantially worse since then. Why did he say that? Well, there are a number of geopolitical flashpoints in the world where nuclear war could erupt that have all become more inflamed over the last decade or so. Relations between the United States and NATO on one hand and Russia on the other hand are the worst they have been since the end of the Cold War. And again, this deterioration goes back for at least a decade, markedly exacerbated by the Russian invasion of Ukraine last year. And the possibility that that conflict could escalate to nuclear war is real and something which we are right to be very concerned about. But it's not the only danger that we face. Relations between the United States and China are the worst they have been since the 1970s. And there is a potential flashpoint, military flashpoint, over Taiwan and over shipping in the South China Sea that could lead to armed conflict between these two countries. a conflict which would almost certainly escalate to a nuclear war. Third, there's a situation in Korea where the North Korean regime has undertaken a series of nuclear tests and a series of tests of missiles to deliver nuclear weapons. It is a profoundly unstable situation and one which could deteriorate into armed conflict almost at any time. Fourth, there's a situation in South Asia, which is actually the flashpoint that worries me the most. India and Pakistan have fought 4 wars since they became independent in the 1940s. There's low-level fighting on the border between India and Pakistan almost every day. And no one who follows events in South Asia closely would ever be surprised to wake up and find out that that low-level conflict had escalated into another war. And if there is a war between India and Pakistan, it will definitely be a nuclear war. And if that happens, it will be a disaster, not just for the people of South Asia, but for the entire world. So there are these 4 geopolitical flashpoints that could lead to nuclear war. And I guess to this we should now add the 5th, the Middle East, where Israel does have nuclear weapons. Iran is on the verge of having nuclear weapons. Tensions there have clearly escalated very dramatically in the last month. And this is another potential flashpoint. In addition to these geopolitical circumstances, there are 2 other conditions which are bringing us to the brink of nuclear war. One is the climate crisis. And we don't necessarily think of these 2 together, but we need to. All of the countries that have nuclear weapons promise that they want to get rid of their weapons at some point in the future when the world is safer. The problem is the world isn't getting safer. And the driver behind this increased danger is the climate crisis. Over the next couple of decades, even if we do all the things that we're supposed to do to mitigate that crisis, conditions on the planet are going to get worse, and there are substantial areas of the planet which will no longer be able to support the human population. This is going to lead to conflict within these countries as people fight for scarce resources. It's going to lead to conflict between nations, fighting over these resources. It's going to lead to migration on a scale we have never seen in human history. And if nuclear weapons remain on the table as these conflicts unfold, the chance they're going to be used is going to grow dramatically. The final factor, which I think we need to be cognizant of, is the advance in cyber technology, which now makes it possible for a terrorist group or a rogue state or one of the nuclear armed states to hack into the command and control centers of another nuclear armed state and either directly cause that country's missiles to be launched, or perhaps more likely to create a false alert, to cause the country that is being hacked to believe that it is being attacked and to trick it into launching its own nuclear arsenal. This is a nightmare for those who are charged with cybersecurity. I know that people in the United States charged with this responsibility look at this and they know that when it comes to cyber warfare, the offense always has the advantage because the defense doesn't know what form the attack is going to take. And US military computer systems are hacked into hundreds of times every day. And so there is a real threat that at some point, someone with very bad intentions could hack into the command and control systems of the nuclear arsenal. So for all of these reasons, we need to understand, again, that nuclear war, this is not something that is an historical thing that we worried about in the 1980s and the 1960s. This is a danger we are living with today, and it is very real, and it is very imminent, and it is growing, and we need to do something about it. Given that, I think it behooves us to understand what will happen if there is a nuclear war. And this is the part of that I want to share with you this morning that I think is most difficult to listen to. But I think it's important for us to understand fully what we're talking about. Many of us have images in our mind of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. We've seen the pictures of what happened to these 2 cities. And these images are a powerful warning to us about what nuclear weapons can do. But the most important thing that we need to understand is that they do not begin to prepare us for what will happen if there's a nuclear war today. Because if, for example, the United States and Russia go to war, it's not going to be 1 or 2 relatively small bombs on 1 or 2 cities. It's going to be many bombs on many cities, and they're going to be much larger. The Hiroshima bomb was the equivalent of 15,000 tons, 15 kilotons of dynamite. Modern weapons are 6 to 50 times bigger than that. 100 to 800 kilotons, 100 to 800,000 tons of TNT. And so I want to describe to you what would happen to a large city in the event of a modern nuclear attack. We don't know the exact targeting strategy of either the United States or Russia, but there's enough in the open source world for us to know that a city like Moscow or New York, Washington, Toronto would be targeted probably with something in the order of 10 to 20 nuclear weapons spread out over the whole metropolitan area, each of which again would be 6 to 50 times more powerful than the Hiroshima bomb. It is kind of difficult to envision this, all these explosions going off at the same time. So I'm going to use a model of a single very large nuclear explosion, 20 megatons, 20 million tons of TNT. The explosive force in this model is greater than we would expect to be delivered to a city today. The destruction I'm going to describe is actually an underestimate because you cause more damage with many smaller weapons than with one large bomb. But it's easier to visualize the single bomb in this model, and it does give us an adequate approximation. Within 1,000th of a second of the detonation of this bomb, a fireball would form, reaching out for 2 miles in every direction. You guys use kilometers. Sorry, 3 kilometers in every direction, 6 kilometers across. Within this entire area, temperatures would approach those on the surface of the sun, and everything would be vaporized. The buildings, the trees, the people, the upper level of the earth itself would disappear. To a distance of 6 kilometers in every direction, the explosion would generate winds greater than 1,000 kilometers per hour. Mechanical forces of that nature destroy anything that human beings can build. To a distance of 9 kilometers in every direction, the heat would be so intense that automobiles would melt. And to a distance of 25 kilometers in every direction, the heat would still be so intense that everything flammable would burn. Paper, cloth, gasoline, heating oil, plastic, wood, it would all ignite. Hundreds of thousands of fires, which over the next half hour would coalesce into a firestorm, 50 kilometers across. Within this entire area, the temperature would rise to 800 degrees centigrade. All of the oxygen would be consumed, and every living thing would die. In the case of Moscow, we're talking about 9 to 10 million people dead in half an hour. In New York, 12 to 15 million people dead in a half an hour. And if this were part of a large-scale war between the United States and Russia, this kind of destruction would take place in every city in both countries, and if every major city, and if NATO were drawn into the conflict, most of the great cities in Canada and Europe as well. All told, we would be talking about something in the order of 200 to 300 million people dead in an afternoon. In addition, the entire economic infrastructure of all the countries involved in this war would be destroyed. There'd be no cell phones, no internet, no electric grid, no food distribution system, no public health system, no law and order system. None of the things that we depend on to keep ourselves alive would survive. And in the months following this attack, the vast majority of the people who were not killed on the first day would also die from radiation poisoning, from starvation, from epidemic disease, from exposure. But so far, I've only been talking about those living in the countries that actually fought the war. What about the rest of the world? Well, the fires from this war would put enough soot into the upper atmosphere to block out the sun across the planet, dropping temperatures an average of 10 degrees Celsius across the planet. Within the interior regions of North America and Eurasia, places like here in Winnipeg, temperatures would drop 25 to 30 degrees Celsius. And this would occur in a matter of days, and it would persist for more than a decade. We have not seen conditions on this earth that cold since the coldest moment of the last ice age, 18,000 years ago. And under these conditions, all of the ecosystems which have evolved since the end of that ice age would collapse. food production would stop, and the vast majority of the human race would starve to death. A study that we published in the journal Nature Food in August of 2022 showed that in the aftermath of a large-scale war between the United States and Russia, 3/4 of the human race, something between 5 and 6 billion people, would starve to death in the first 2 years. And the famine would continue beyond that. The same study also showed that a more limited war, as might, for example, take place between India and Pakistan, would also cause global climate disruption and global famine, not quite as severe, but pretty bad. 2 billion people dead in 2 years, including about 90% of the population of Canada and 130 million people in the United States. This is not the plot of a grade B movie that I've been describing to you. This is the danger that we are living with every day, that we continue to allow these weapons to exist. And we have to understand that. This is what is going to happen if we don't take action. But, and this is the most important point, this is not the future that must be. Nuclear weapons are not a force of nature over which we have no control. It is not as though an asteroid is coming at this planet and there's nothing we can do about it. These are little machines that we have built with our own hands. They're about the size of this podium that I'm standing at. We have already dismantled some 50,000 of these weapons. There are 12,000 remaining. We know exactly how to take them apart. We could do it in about 5 or 6 years if we made the decision to do it. What is lacking is the political will on the part of our leaders to take this step, and on the part of the general population to make our leaders do what they need to do. Fortunately, there is a global movement of which you are a part that is growing today, that is determined to make our leaders do the right thing. Starting in 2007, the International Physicians for the Prevention of Nuclear War, the organization I work with, began a new global campaign, the International Campaign to Abolish Nuclear Weapons, with the express intent of securing a treaty to prohibit nuclear weapons. In less than 10 years, we secured the adoption of that treaty at the United Nations by a vote of 121 to 1. The treaty has now been signed formally by 96 countries and ratified by 69, and it has entered into legal force. For the countries which have signed that treaty, it is now illegal to possess nuclear weapons, to build nuclear weapons, to develop nuclear weapons, to allow nuclear weapons to be stationed on their territory, to participate in the financial arrangements which make the development of nuclear weapons possible. This is a huge step in the right direction, and it is a direct result of the work of ordinary people like you and me who took up this challenge. The problem, of course, is that to date, the 9 countries which actually have the nuclear weapons and their allies in NATO and in the other states that have security arrangements with the United States, like Japan, Australia, and South Korea, those countries have not joined this movement yet. And so it is particularly important for those of us who live in the United States or in other NATO countries to provide the political power needed to make our governments change course. We in the United States have formed a national campaign called Back from the Brink. I'll be doing a workshop about it later today. Here in Canada, there's an enormous amount of activity ongoing in many different fora to try to get the government of Canada to sign on to the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. We have the vehicles to take action, but what we need to do is to mobilize people to use those vehicles. We need to reach out to the vast number of people who don't understand the things that we've been talking about this morning, who don't know how close we are to nuclear war, who don't know how bad a nuclear war will be, who don't know they have the power to prevent this from happening. And that's the challenge before all of us, and what we're going to be talking about for the next couple of days. So a couple of just maybe framing comments before I stop and take any questions or comments people might have. This is terribly difficult stuff we're going to be talking about. There's an enormous responsibility on our shoulders because we know about this danger and we know we can do something about it. And it is profoundly unfair to all of you to have to shoulder this responsibility. You did nothing to create this problem. And in that very important sense, you're not responsible for it. But in a more important sense, you are responsible. Because if you and me and other people like us don't take action, this problem is not going to go away. And the terrible things I've talked about are going to happen. But if we do take action, I believe we can be successful. No one of you or no one of us is expected to solve this problem by ourselves. But neither is any one of us expected to step away from that portion of the job which is ours to do. And if each one of us figures out what it is that we can do and does that, I am very confident that we're going to be successful. As I said, this is a terrible burden that we all bear. But I think we should also look upon this as something of a gift, and I want to close on this note. Every one of us wants to do something good with our life. We want it to matter that we've been here. Those of us living today have literally been given the opportunity to save the world. And there is nothing better that anyone can ever do with his or her life. And so let us take up this task. Let us educate our friends and our relatives and our communities. Let's mobilize the political pressure that's needed to bring about a change in nuclear policy, to get our governments to do the right thing, to eliminate their nuclear weapons. And I think at some point in the very near future, we're all going to be able to look ourselves in the mirror and say, I helped save the world. And that is going to be a very, very, very good thing. Thank you. How do you want to handle questions?